Well, welcome to the Decarb Connect podcast. We are here at Decarb Connect UK in Manchester, my hometown. So very pleased to be joined here by Tim Atkinson from CFP Energy. And we're going to have a chat today about some of the things that we're hearing at the event and also your thoughts on the market as well. So Tim, if you could start by introducing yourself and CFP Energy.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. So I'm Director Sales and Trading at CFP Energy. We're a carbon, energy and environmental risk management firm. Our focus, certainly my focus, well, it has been for the last, hate to say it, 20 odd years now, has been carbon markets, and in more recent years, looking at the UK ETS. So that's certainly been the focus of our conversations today with customers, but it's been great to kind of get a bigger picture. I'm an engineer by background, so the geek in me comes out quite often. It's nice to talk to people about their decarbonisation sort of programs and hear what different industry challenges is. So I think certainly in the bigger picture of decarbonisation, it's been a great event to get that wider picture and hear what industry is up to.
Great. Well, as you said, there's a lot going on here today in terms of the types of people we have here and the topics that are being discussed. We're meeting here at the end of March 2025. Uncertainty is a buzzword we're hearing. We were recently in Houston for our US event. So uncertainty, with the geopolitical situation globally, but also for industrials operating here in the UK. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of the challenges that you're seeing your clients or industrials that are facing and how they're navigating those?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of cycle of events. We focus on talking here about decarbonisation, which I guess covers energy, it covers technology, it covers the market solutions, and you mentioned the geopolitical events, the Western world in the way that it's dealt with kind of decarbonisation. Certainly when you look at the EU ETS and also the UK ETS, has very much been a market-based solution. Energy markets, whether it's gas or power, are market-based solution, and sometimes they don't react very well when there's risk in the world. And I think it's certainly been an eye-opener for me over the last couple of years that you think, who'd have imagined that your UK energy prices are influenced by what's going on in the world, whether we're going to get LNG cargoes in and we're competing with Japan. So certainly how gas prices have become very global has been a big influence. And I think if you look back at kind of 2022, the energy crisis there, in terms of market volatility, price movements, it's incredibly difficult for companies to manage that risk. And it almost happened too quickly. And both, in carbon markets, we saw highs of over £100 per tonne in the UK carbon market, €100 in the EU. And then not 12 months later, it was half of that or even a third of that. So again, when you're trying to plan a strategy, decarbonisation, sometimes it's a bit more of a focus on the short term, firefighting. And I think most companies here in 2022, post-COVID as well, would say they were in firefighting mode. It was, as we heard earlier, how do you deal with energy prices that are running to £300 a megawatt hour and things like that? So now the dust has settled a little bit. Certainly I felt the last 6 months have been more, should we say, structured conversations, and companies are taking a bit of a breath and trying to think to the future. And I think that leads to more strategic discussions around how do they manage their energy exposure? How do they manage their carbon exposure? What are the technology options they're going to be? So I think that's definitely a theme I've seen in the last 6 months, is companies are really finally now finding the bandwidth, the time to actually start to address some of this. So again, we might well move in the next couple of years, assuming there's no other shocks that customers or companies have to deal with, into a phase where we might see these projects come into fruition, more long-term thinking, more strategic discussions around hedging carbon prices. So that's certainly where I think we're at.
Yeah. And you ran a workshop yesterday looking specifically at this, and there was a lot of interest. You described it as we're at a moment in time where a paradigm shift. Can you talk a little bit more about that, the sort of why now, and what are the implications of the types of next steps that these industrials make?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to my previous point that policy, obviously carbon markets, particularly the emissions trading scheme, is driven by policy. It's driven by creating a demand-supply balance, a reducing cap, less free allocations to industry. And when you look ahead at the next 5 years that we have the clarity on at the moment, the current phases for the UK ETS runs until 2030. There's a consultation going on a future phase post 2030. Maybe it's going to be 7 years, 10 years, we don't know yet. But there is that clarity from government that that's going to be there. And when you look at it and the net zero ambition by 2050, looking to get, I think it's like an 80% cut by 2035 is the Committee on Climate Change recommendations. Lots happened, a lot's been done, which is good. But more than I've ever seen in my time in emissions trading, carbon markets, it's a real challenge. And I think as well as that, not the low-hanging fruit, but a lot of the reductions, particularly in the UK over the last couple of years, or last maybe 10 years, have been down to the power sector. We've seen this massive uptake in offshore wind, which is great. I think there was a statistic I read from Carbon Brief, which was power-related emissions in the UK have dropped 74% in the last 10 years with the closure of coal-fired power stations. We heard earlier we've still got that gas need. That picks up the slack when the wind doesn't blow. But I think then part of that paradigm shift is very much we're saying to industry, it's almost kind of over to you now, guys. Government is very much looking at the next cuts to the cap and the reductions in carbon emissions, particularly in the UK and EU, to be driven by industry. And as we've heard today, that's a real challenge. Abatement costs are higher, technology availability is patchy perhaps, and it's still developing, whether that be hydrogen, carbon capture, or some of the other technologies. UK industry is really leading the charge, but it's still very much in test phase. And I think the challenge will be is, how will the carbon price, should we say, under the UK ETS, rise as to meet the sort of abatement cost that those sort of technologies are going to achieve. So, I think more than ever, that paradigm shift you mentioned, that transition, now is the time to start thinking about it. Because if you wait too long, by 2030, you might be finding if you haven't had the ability or funding to decarbonise, you're having to buy twice as many allowances at 3 times the cost. So unless you prepare for that, your compliance costs could go through the roof. And does that start to eat into funding that might be available for technology solutions? So it's all kind of part of that balanced strategic picture that we're trying to say as companies, look, think about your future costs, think about your decarbonisation sort of strategy, what trajectories are going to take, and use the different either market-based mechanisms in the short term to make sure that you protect those longer-term decarbonisation solutions looking forward.
No, there's a lot to think about there. In terms of what actions industrials should actually be taking sort of immediately, obviously you talked about that time sensitivity. Like, what should they be either doing right away in the short term, or what questions should they be kind of talking about? You mentioned a few there internally in terms of how they're approaching it, and who should be involved with those conversations internally as well?
Yeah, and if we're talking specifically kind of, should we say, the short term, the carbon exposure, the carbon market, emissions trading scheme exposure, I think that's been a big change in the way, don't have to go back too far, and I'm talking 4 or 5 years, where managing carbon compliance under an ETS was probably a once or twice a year exercise, mainly managed by energy managers or sustainability. That was where it fell. That was a time when prices were kind of under 30 euros back in the old EU ETS. The UK ETS were just getting started. But now here we are, very volatile markets. It's having to be dealt with by procurement teams, by Treasury, who are maybe better used to dealing with that kind of fluctuating price and how best to manage it. And that's not for everyone. We still have some clients who will kind of sit tight if budget is constrained perhaps, and look to buy once a year near the compliance deadlines. But certainly on that carbon compliance, our message is there's a way to do it smarter, and it needs a little bit more thought about how you execute and learn from other, most companies we speak to, big industrials, they'll have experience trading other commodities, energy, gas, currency, for example, if that's, so learn from that. It's the same principles apply. It's risk management, it's how to track the market, it's when is a good time to buy. don't just think about managing your previous year's requirements. Think about if prices are favorable, look ahead to 1-2 years ahead and start to hedge that. And that's where our solutions we've been working a lot on, educating customers, helping them understand the ability to forward hedge, how to access those markets, understand credit and that kind of thing. So for us as a carbon expert, carbon trading expert, that's been the real focus.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sort of sharing in a nutshell some of the things that you're looking at and advising clients on. I think there's a report. We can definitely put the link into the show notes for anyone who wants more information on that. So as we start off by saying we are here in Manchester for Decarb Connect UK. If you couldn't make it, you can check out the website for our future events. We've got our Europe event in Amsterdam coming up in June. So do visit the website for more information about how you can join us. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, pleasure.